is Dennis McKenna. Dr. Dennis McKenna, the brother of Terrence McKenna, the late Terrence McKenna, who was on this program many times, was a good friend. Terrence, God bless him, is gone now, and I'm so sorry. He was such a great man. He was such a great mind. But you're about to have a strange journey yourself, because his brother Dennis, he almost, frankly, he sounds like a clone, but I'll let you decide for yourself. Last hour, we talked with Richard C. Hoagland. We've got a link up on the website right now to the John Glenn statement made on Frazier, or at least a sort of a little part of it. You can see that little part right now by going to my website at www.artbell.com. Everybody's taking a look at that one. NBC posted it, put it up there. It's actual video with the audio and only a partial statement. And then just to sort of wrap that up, Ann in Albuquerque, New Mexico writes, "Hey, Art, is it possible that Richard C. could be the Antichrist?" Yeah, I thought about that. Sure, it's possible. Now, Dennis McKenna, who sent me the following bio on himself. I'm going to try and read this. No guarantees. For the last 25 years, Dennis McKenna has pursued the interdisciplinary study of pharmacology and plant hallucinogens. He is co-author, of course, with his brother Terrence, of The Invisible Landscape, Mind Hallucinogens, and the I Ching. Seabury Press, 1975, Citadel Press, 91. A philosophical and metaphysical exploration of the ontological implications of psychedelic drugs, which resulted from the two brothers' early investigations of the Amazonian hallucinogens in 1971. He received his doctorate in 1984 from the University of British Columbia. His doctoral research focused on anthropharmacological investigations of the botany, chemistry, and pharmacology of Ahuza and Ukubi, two orally active, I believe it's tryptamine-based hallucinogens used by indigenous peoples of the northwest Amazon. Following the completion of his doctorate, Dr. McKenna received postdoctoral research fellowships in the Laboratory of Clinical Pharmacology, National Institute of Mental Health, and the Department of Neurology, Stanford University School of Medicine. In 1990, he joined Dennis. Yes. He joined Shaman what?
Pharmaceuticals.
Pharmaceuticals as director of
ethnopharmacology.
Thank you. You're going to help me right through this. Then went back to Minnesota, I guess, in 1993 to join the Aveda Corporation.
Right.
Manufacturer of a natural cosmetics product as senior research pharmacologist.
Pharmacognosist.
You want to read the rest of this?
No.
He currently works as a scientific consultant to clients in the herbal, nutritional, and pharmaceutical industries. Together with two colleagues in the natural products industry, he incorporated the nonprofit Institute for Natural Products Research, or INPR, in October of '98 to promote research and scientific education with respect to botanical medicines and other natural medicines. He is currently a senior lecturer at the Center for Spirituality and Healing, that's interesting, in the Academic Health Center at the University of Minnesota. Dr. McKenna serves on the advisory board of the American Botanical Council and on the editorial board of, Dennis?
Phytomedicine.
Thank you. International Journal of
Phytotherapy and Phytopharmacology.
Wonderful. Founding board member and vice president of the Hefner, right? Hefner?
Hefter.
Okay, Hefter.
Not to be confused with Hefner.
I understand. Okay, a nonprofit scientific organization dedicated to the investigation of therapeutic applications for psychedelic plants and compounds. He's also served as board member and research advisor to Botanical Dimensions, a nonprofit organization dedicated to the investigation of
ethnomedically
significant plants. He was a primary organizer and key scientific collaborator for the
WASCA
project, an international biomedical study of
WASCA,
a psychoactive drink used in ritual context by indigenous peoples and
syncretic
religious groups in Brazil. He has conducted extensive
ethnobotanical
field work in the Peruvian, Colombian, and Brazilian Amazon. He has served as invited speaker at numerous scientific congresses, seminars, and symposia. Dr. McKenna is author or co-author of over 35 scientific papers in peer-reviewed journals. His publications have appeared in the Journal of
Ethnopharmacology,
European Journal of Pharmacology, Brain Research, Journal of Neuroscience, Journal of Neurochemistry, Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease, Economic Botany, and elsewhere. My God almighty, Dennis. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Art. It's great to be here.
And thank you for the help.
Am I on the air?
Of course you're on the air.
All right.
Yes, you're on the air. And it's like listening to Terrence to hear your voice. I was so shocked when I called you and we talked on the phone. I just sat there kind of blown away. Just blown away.
Yes, well, everyone says we sound the same, especially on the telephone.
Oh, and here on the air, believe me, you sound the same. Now, when you and I talked on the phone, putting all of this simply, you said that you were more into the science of drugs, while your brother Terrence was, my words, probably more hand-to-mouth.
Well, yeah, we sort of have a division of labor, I guess you could call it. He was more interested in the philosophical and metaphysical side, and I was more interested in what you might call the nuts and bolts side, although...
So, in other words, when you would, for
obviously, there was a lot of overlap of those two things.
So, for example, when you would discover a new drug, you'd say, here, take this, Terrence.
Not exactly.
Or Terrence said, hey, what you got there? I'll take that.
I just got curious about how these things work. And, those of your listeners that are familiar with our experiences in the Amazon and have read The Invisible Landscape will know that we came up against a number of things down there that it's very hard for science to get its hands around.
Explain. No, actually, you know what? I have never really heard the story of what happened in the Amazon.
Well, I don't know if we can go into it here. It's kind of a long story.
Well, maybe the high points.
Well, those of you who've read my brother's book, True Hallucinations, will be familiar with it. I would like to say, Art, before we get into that, I'd like to say that I very much appreciate the support that has come. It's been a rough couple of years here.
I know, horrible, actually.
And I very much appreciate the support that came from many of your listeners. There's really no way to thank so many people, but while we were struggling with Terrence's illness and his family, we always knew that we weren't alone, that many people
never
loved Terrence so much, and we could feel that support.
Terrence had a brain tumor, for those who don't know, and Dennis, I interviewed Terrence very much toward the end.
Right.
And his he was so good with it. His philosophical approach to the possibility that he might die was incredible. I had him on the air, and he talked about it. And boy, did he have it together.
Yes, he had it together. And as he said in a couple of interviews, if the use of these plants and working with these shamanic states doesn't prepare you for what lies beyond, I don't know what does. And I think that's true. I think that, a lot of his experiences in life, led up to that, so there were no real surprises. And, in the latter stages, I think he was very much ready to take control of the starship and let it take him where it would. But I did want to express my gratitude to so many of your listeners that were part of that struggle.
Well, I had Terrence on many times, and the audience knew him as one of their own, so it could not have been any other way.
That's right.
He was absolutely, Dennis, a remarkable, one of the most remarkable men I've ever had the pleasure to know. So I guess that's pretty good as remembrances go. One of the most remarkable people I've ever known. God, what a mind he had.
Yes, he had a great mind, and he was a remarkable person, and in ways that, you know, the world is a poorer place without him. And I'm very lucky to have had, you know, to have grown up with him. I mean, he was obviously a great influence on me and on many people.
Well, anyway, the two of you did go to the Amazon, and he never really talked a lot about that. We touched on it, but he never really talked a lot about the nuts and bolts of what actually went on down there.
Well, I guess, you know, how to get into this story. You know,
why did you go down? What made you go down there?
Well, we both grew up in the 60s, of course, and I guess you could say we were hippies during that period of foment in the United States. And, you know, I was in Haight-Ashbury in 67, and Terrence was living in Berkeley, and so we were interested in psychedelics, you know, and sort of in an experimental phase of those with our lives. But the one that stuck out in our experience at that time was one that still is fairly rare, and that is DMT, which stands for dimethyltryptamine. Back in the 60s, it used to be called the businessman's trip because it's so short. The way in duration, the way that DMT is normally taken, pure synthetic DMT is, essentially you smoke the free base as you do crack, and when you do that, it produces a very rapid but extremely intense psychedelic experience, which lasts about 10 minutes.
Terrence had a quote about that experience that he used to say. He compared it, I'm trying to remember what he compared it to. But he had a
roller coaster ride, or perhaps a rocket ship ride.
Well, something about a rocket ship ride. But he said it was probably the closest thing to heaven on earth, or something fairly significant like that.
Well, I don't know if it's exactly heaven on earth, because it can be quite terrifying. I mean, it's very overwhelming, in that form, and it's also sort of very hard to pull anything out of it. It's such a profound and such a rapid experience that you come back not really able to English much that you experienced. I mean, about all you can say is, "My God, what happened?" And that was part of our motivation. That was at least the exoteric motivation for going to the Amazon, because we had heard in a paper by an ethnobotanist, Ari Schultes, about a very obscure hallucinogen used by the Witoto in the Northwest Amazon. This was called ukue in their language, and it was a DMT containing sap or resin from a tree. But what was unusual about it, and what's unusual about the pharmacology of DMT to a certain extent, is that DMT is not orally active. It is, if you eat it, pure DMT, nothing happens. Because
you have to smoke it.
You have to smoke it in the synthetic form, because it's inactivated by enzymes in your gut and in your liver called monoamine oxidase.
So it's got to go straight from the lungs to the bloodstream.
Right, or somehow bypass that system. Now, in the case of ayahuasca, which is the other beverage, the psychoactive beverage that forms the linchpin of Amazonian shamanism, and has been sort of my preoccupation for 30 years, they get around this by combining two plants. They combine the leaves of one plant, which they call chacruna, with the bark of a vine, which they call ayahuasca, and the beverage itself is called ayahuasca. The bark contains compounds which are monoamine oxidase inhibitors, and when combined with the leaves of the chacruna, which contain DMT, that protects the DMT from degradation by this monoamine oxidase.
So now you can drink
enzyme system. So now it becomes orally active. Exactly. But it becomes a very different experience. Instead of lasting 10 minutes, it lasts more like 3 or 4 hours.
Oh, my.
But the intensity is less. So, it's like the slowed down. It's like you're seeing it at normal speed, and when you smoke it, you're seeing it on the fast forward.
Dennis, I have no frame of reference to know what this what this combination of drugs is like. Is it like LSD? Is it a lesser experience?
No, I wouldn't say it's a lesser experience. It's a different experience than LSD.
If you compare intensity levels.
It's always related to dose. I mean, ayahuasca can be extremely intense. It's similar to mushrooms, and it's similar chemically and pharmacologically to mushrooms because that is also, psilocybin and DMT are
mescaline
in the same chemical family. Mescaline is in a different chemical family.
Okay.
DMT and psilocybin are tryptamines. And mescaline and their ilk are in another class called phenethylamines. So it's actually different. But ayahuasca is unique in terms of its effects. You can't really say it's somewhat like LSD, yes. It's somewhat like mushrooms, yes. But it's really its own.
And there's no language to describe the difference from LSD or from some other experience that somebody out there might relate to?
Well, I think you could say LSD, at least in my past experience, tends to be more of a personal thing, more psychoanalytic, more, in a sense, about you and about your psychology, whatever problems you may have, that sort of thing. Ayahuasca can be that way, but I think there are more transpersonal elements, more archetypical elements. It's much like dreaming, and it's like dreaming while you're awake in the sense that you experience many archetypal type themes, and I guess that's the best way to describe it. People do use it for self-examination and psychotherapy, but it seems to incorporate. It seems to be, I guess, more of a direct pipeline to the collective unconscious. Many of what
now that's something Terrence said about it.
Right.
That's something Terrence said about it. All right, Dennis, Doctor, we're at the bottom of the hour.
Sure.
Should I call you Doctor or Dennis or both?
Dennis is fine.
Dennis is fine. All right, stay right there, Dennis. We're at the bottom of the hour. I'm Art Bell, and this is Coast to Coast AM. And don't do any of this. If you want to listen, that's fine, but nobody's encouraging you to do any drugs. Stay natural. You'll be happy.
The drums are going tonight. She hears only whispers of some quiet conversation. She's coming in 12:30 flight.
My guest is Dennis McKenna, Dr. Dennis McKenna, the brother of the late Terrence McKenna, who's on the show many times with me. And we have had many discussions on this program about drugs, and we're going to touch on many of them tonight. And none of this discussion should be interpreted by anybody out there as an indication that you should go out and do it. This is an examination of what some of this is all about. That's all. Drugs are part of our life. They're very much part of our life. Whether the over-the-counter type, the type you get at the store where it says drugs, or the guy down the street. Drugs are part of our society. Actually, a very large part of our society. So dare we talk about them? Absolutely. again, Dr. Dennis McKenna. Dennis, welcome back.
Thank you.
How much of the experience of the pharmaceutical, the drugs themselves, crossed into a sort of a metaphysical search? How much of a part of all of this was that?
Well, I think at that time in our lives, it was very much bound up with the metaphysical search. We were so impressed with the effects of synthetic DMT, and so sort of frustrated with the rapidity of the experience. That was the rationale for going to the Amazon, to look for this this very obscure orally active form called ukuhe. As it turned out, ukuhe, which I returned to the Amazon 10 years later and did part of my doctoral work, turned out not to be that interesting. But in the process of investigating these things, we encountered the mushrooms when we went to La Chorrera for the first time, and eventually ayahuasca. And those are the orally active tryptamine hallucinogens that really have more depth to them.
I'm somewhat curious.
I'm
sorry. As you go to the Amazon, and there are you, Terrence and yourself are in the Amazon. You're going to some natives way out in the middle of nowhere. How do you begin to ask them? Well, what plants? Take us to the plants. We want to have this experience. How do you approach them?
Well, we were very naive at the time. We didn't really know. We had read a few papers from Schulte's work, from the Botanical Museum leaflets that reported this for the first time. We just, we were 20 and 24 years old, respectively. I mean, we figured, the world was our oyster, and we could just go down there and get to it. And as it turned out, that wasn't so far wrong. And there was an amusing incident when we were on the way to La Chorrera, which is the ancestral home of the Witoto, and this area of diffusion where this ukuhe is most widely used, even though now it's pretty much a dying cultural tradition. But there was a Colombian anthropologist at one of the villages that we passed through, Dr. Collier, and he claimed that, if we went and asked the people for ukuhe, most would not know what we were talking about, because it was a secret that only the shaman knew. Oh. And if we chanced to ask a shaman, he would probably kill us for even mentioning it.
Really? They told you that?
Well, he told us that, but he was a little paranoid himself. So as it turned out, it wasn't so bad. And when I actually went back in 1981 as a graduate student to sort of more systematically go about this, I went to a different place. Colombia was difficult to travel in at that point, and I went to Peru to a village called Pucuurquillo, which is just north of the Amazon, downriver from the city of Iquitos, and that is sort of the new home of the Witoto after they were driven out of Colombia during the rubber boom. And so I went there and interviewed many people and sampled many collections. And what I found was that, it's a kind of it's a disappearing tradition among these people who have been, very much culturally impacted. And it was kind of like, well, I remember my grandfather knew something about this, or,
really?
My father knew something, I can try and make it. Of course, they didn't speak English or even Spanish. We were working through translators. But that was, that seemed to be the position it held at that time. But we did find one or two older people, older shaman in this group who really did know how to make the real stuff. And so, we did end up getting samples, bringing them back to the lab, and being able to, well, for my personal reasons, complete the thesis.
How long were you there? In both instances?
Well, in 1971, when we went down, we weren't really there that long. We went down in January of 71 and came out around the end of April.
That's quite a while.
Right. And in 81, when I went to Peru, I wasn't Puca or Quillo the whole time. I was traveling all over the country because I was also investigating ayahuasca. I was there about 5.5 months.
Oh, no, that's quite a while.
A while.
Yeah. Did you actually live out with the natives for a while?
Part of the time. But when you're working with ayahuasca in the Amazon among the mestizo populations is really a sort of an urban phenomenon. There are still tribes out in up the rivers that are using it, but it's become amalgamated into mestizo folk medicine, so it's really on the outskirts of cities like Iquitos and Pucallpa.
How much longer will all of this even be there? In other words, you're saying it's being assimilated, it's disappearing in another 10 or 20 or 50 years. Would you not be able to make that trip with the same results?
It would be difficult. A lot of these indigenous tribes are definitely in a state of cultural decline. They've been impacted by so many factors, relocation, dislocation, and loss of their cultures. But in mestizo folk medicine, where ayahuasca is commonly used and is kind of the at the center of a whole pharmacopoeia of medicinal plants that these people use, it's, I think that tradition is going to survive, especially now that there's so much interest from American tourists. This whole industry of drug tourism, which I don't necessarily think is entirely a bad thing or a good thing, but it's, in a sense, it's been a shot in the arm to the traditional people.
You mean there are people that they're drug tourists? They go down there just...
People that go down to have these experiences, usually with ayahuasca. The problem is that there's also, anytime there's a revival, there's also a lot of charlatans. It's not easy to get to the people that really know what they're doing, but you can easily find anybody on the street corners of Iquitos who would be willing to sell you, something that they call ayahuasca. You couldn't really be sure that that's what it is, but so it's a mixed bag. But I think one of the positive things about it is that some of these people are sincere and they are rediscovering their own traditions. I don't think ayahuasca is going to go away very soon. And in fact, there are indications that it may be spreading, and that, again, that has negative and positive aspects about it.
Let's talk a little bit.
I would like to say I appreciate that you sort of put in that caveat there at the end of the hour. I'm not on this program to advocate that anyone should
use of drugs,
any of these things. I think that they should be investigated. I disagree with the whole strategy of the war on drugs. I think that's very short-sighted, and I think that people should have, personal choice to form relationships with plants, which is basically what this is about. And when I do
have a lot of trouble with the war on drugs,
right?
Particularly the way it's being orchestrated disproportionately with regard to marijuana, for example.
Well, it doesn't. It simply doesn't work. I think the thing to do, a better approach is to enable people to make informed choices. And when I say form relationships with plants, I use that term deliberately because I think when you choose to use a drug of any sort, you're choosing to have a relationship with that substance.
That's
and just as you should be careful in choosing your friends and choosing the people you want to hang out with, you should be careful and make informed choices in terms of the substances you put into your body, and particularly with the psychedelics, the circumstances, the set and setting that Leary talked about is so important for the effects. And that is why shamanism is really the model. These people have been working with these substances for thousands of years. And, if we're going to develop models, whether psychotherapeutic or shamanic or whatever, but you need to, in order to use these substances safely and, in a way that has benefits, and I believe they can be used safely and they can be beneficial, but the context is so important. And this is the problem, that in this culture we lack that context. We lack that traditional context.
Are there laws against these drugs now in America?
Which drugs?
Well, DMT.
DMT is a controlled substance, definitely.
All right.
When it comes to plants that contain DMT, of which many, many do, because DMT is a very simple compound and it's very widespread in nature, the situation is much murkier. It's not clear. In fact, the plants themselves, as far as anyone knows, are not illegal. But then they contain a controlled substance, DMT. Our own brain contains DMT. So this is creating some legal conundrums right now. How can you ban all plants containing DMT without essentially criminalizing all of nature? DMT has been detected in over 150 species of plants, and that's only because somebody's bothered to look. My personal belief is it's probably found in thousands, if not tens of thousands of plant genera.
Doctor, quick question for you. Hallucinogens, the entire family, as a whole, are they addictive, physically addictive, in your opinion?
No, they're not. They're not physically addictive. They don't work on that part of the brain that leads to addiction, which substances like cocaine, for instance, have a completely different neurochemistry, neuropharmacology, and they work on the parts of the brain that have to do with our pleasure sensations. And so they tend to create a craving. If anything, the hallucinogens are anti-addictive, or you're certainly,
Some people would take it and say, I'm not doing that again.
Exactly. You sort of have to get your courage up to keep doing it.
Yes.
So, they're definitely not addictive in the physiological sense or the psychological sense.
Are there diminishing returns as one continues to use it?
Again, I think that depends on the substance that one is using, and it depends on the context in which you use it. If you use it for recreational purposes or without any real intent, I mean, in taking ayahuasca, they always emphasize that it's important to have an intent, then I think after a while there are diminishing returns, because, you have no framework in which to understand it. On the other hand, if you're working in a context, whether it's something that you create, sort of your self-referential context for learning, or whether it's a more traditional shamanic type context, then I think there are anything but diminishing returns. I mean, that's the thing, particularly with substances like ayahuasca. If people shouldn't get involved with it without knowing that it's really a life's work. It's a path. It's not an instant, it's not a fast track to enlightenment or anything like that. It's like any other discipline. And to be involved with ayahuasca or many of these substances, really, what I call the classical hallucinogens, it's a discipline. And people should approach it that way.
All right. Back to the war on drugs for just a second. Do you delineate in your own mind the difference between the hallucinogens and cocaine? For example, we've got, over 2 million people in jail in America right now for various drug violations. Very few of them no doubt, relating to DMT or any other class of hallucinogens. Some,
right?
But the majority, cocaine and heroin and that sort of class of drugs.
Right. Well, again, where I think a differentiation could be made that might be useful and might actually help clarify some of the issues on the war on drugs are to make a distinction between plants and compounds. If you look at the way coca is used in Peru among the indigenous peoples, or even opium, as a plant substance, it's much less harmful.
Yeah, they chew it.
Much more difficult to become addicted or abused. And I think if the drug warriors were to say, we'll make a distinction between plants and drugs, we will focus on substances that are extracted, purified, or synthesized. Plants, we're not so interested in. 90% of the drug problem would go away if they would just, say, we're not going, primarily cannabis would drop out of the debate.
Sure.
And they would say,
right away.
Well, it's an herb, and we're not that concerned with it.
Well, what would happen if they brought coca plants, raw coca plants, to America and began selling them on the street or in a store, as they are sold in South America and used and chewed? Would it be an instant hit, or would it be sort of, hey, what's the big deal?
It would be, hey, what's the big deal? I don't think most people would bother with it because, because it is no big deal. I mean, coca as traditionally used, is about as harmful as green tea. And there have been studies that show that coca, among the people who live in the Andes who depend on it, it's an appetite suppressant. It also supplies minerals and vitamins that they don't ordinarily get in their diet. I mean, chewing coca leaves is, it really has, it's like, it's about as bad a habit as drinking coffee.
So I was going to say, is it like coffee?
Yeah, it's somewhat like that, a mild.
So then you think for the purposes of settling this damned war, this godforsaken war, we could delineate between plants and purified substances from plants?
Well, I think that would be a step in the right direction. And if the government were to say, we're going to focus our efforts on people that are extracting or synthesizing or making these pure substances, which are much more easily abused and inherently more dangerous because they're more potent, I think that that would be a step in the right direction. I don't expect it to happen because I personally, I don't think personally that the war on drugs is particularly about protecting people from drugs. If that were the case, then all the focus would be on tobacco, which is an herb. It also kills 400,000 people a year in this country, as opposed to all other drugs of abuse, which kill maybe 20,000 people a year.
Absolutely right. All right.
So,
here we are at the top of the hour already. Time really flies. We can find out. So, Dr. McKenna, hold on. We'll get back to you after the news at the top of the hour. We're talking about drugs, all kinds of drugs, with Dr. Dennis McKenna. I'm Art Bell.
The world was on fire and no one could save me but you. Strange what desire will make foolish people do. I never dreamed that I'd meet somebody like you.
Guest is Dr. Dennis McKenna, and we are talking about drugs. We're talking about plants, and we're talking about drugs, and we're talking about the drug war, and we're talking about all kinds of strange things and interesting things. So I suggest you stay right where you are, because we have only just begun. Once again, here is Dr. Dennis McKenna. Dennis, welcome back.
Thank you.
I have a question for you that you cannot, you certainly don't have to answer. You can consider it, not answer it. I spoke with Dr. Timothy Leary before he passed away briefly and had set up an interview, and of course there wasn't enough life left, and we never made it. Although he was very comfortable to the very end. He had a big cylinder next to him. It's a long story. Anyway, when I interviewed Terrence. I asked Terrence something that I had heard about Dr. Leary, and that was that out there somewhere, buried or secreted away in a place that might still be found, it is said, and has been said for years, there are 20,000 hits of Blue Sandos, LSD.
Uh-huh.
And Terrence chuckled a little and didn't exactly say he knew where they were, but he didn't say he didn't know where they were.
He didn't know where they were.
You don't think he knew?
Of course not.
Well,
I think that's an urban myth.
An urban legend? You really think so?
I do.
You don't think Timothy socked him away somewhere, huh?
Well, I don't know. Maybe he did.
Yeah, maybe he did, right. Okay.
I hope they're cold anyway, or they won't be much good.
Well, that's true, isn't it? All right, so urban legend. Okay. Somebody writes, and I've got this screen I can look at, this computer screen, and people can send what's called a fast blast and ask questions. Somebody writes and says, would you ask Dr. McKenna, please, if the spraying of defoliant in South America, which we are doing now due to the whole drug war thing, is affecting these plants in the areas that you talked about?
Well, yes. It's certainly, it's affecting everything in the areas that we're talking about. I actually, Dr. Mark Plotkin, who is an ethnobotanist that many of you may know about, he's very well known as the author of Tales of a Shaman's Apprentice, among other things, but he is working down there with his nonprofit group called the Amazon Conservation Team, and he has been doing quite a bit of work in southern Colombia and has seen firsthand the impact of this defoliation. It's not only, the problem is that it's very hard to target the defoliant only on the coca fields. It also drifts over the crops that these people depend on for their food and the villages where the people live. And anyone can go down there and see that, the impact is tremendous. Children with terrible skin diseases and, it's definitely impacting those people. And it's outrageous. It basically amounts to international criminal behavior on the part of the United States, in my opinion. There's got to be a better way to deal with this problem than toxifying the environment. Again,
that's a war against the plants. It's not a war against the people that are extracting and purifying.
Well, yeah. It's a war. It's an attempt to exterminate the plants, which is in itself a bad idea. But the problem is it also impacts. These plants are growing where these people live, and they also grow their crops in the same or adjacent fields. So it gets in their food supply. It gets on the people themselves directly. This is just one of the consequences of this misguided policy.
All right, a little about DMT and drugs like it. I played a song just for fun, before you came on, Journey to the Center of the Mind. And at one part of that song it says, but be careful, referring to the journey, you might not come back. Now, with LSD, there were some people that essentially didn't come back.
Right.
And I've always wondered, and I'd like your opinion, do you think that these are people who were predisposed to psychological difficulties in the first place, or that the ingestion of whatever drug we're talking about here was the primary cause of extended difficulties?
No, I think that in most cases, the incidences of people who, quote unquote, don't come back are extremely low, for one thing. And I think that in most cases you can say that there were previous psychological problems, and that the drugs, the LSD or whatever, was basically a catalyst, that they were at risk, of psychosis anyway.
The problem, of course, is that these are the very people on the street level that are most likely to do something like that.
Well, again, this comes back to the whole issue. Number one, psychedelics are not for everyone. And number two, you have to pay attention to set and setting. The context is so important because, again, in the shamanic context, in the use of ayahuasca, for example, in Peru, when yes, people do get into psychological difficulties. They can have panic reactions or anxiety. Many people often become convinced that they are either dying or that they are not going to come back. Mm-hmm. But the shaman, has a bag of tricks, essentially, and is able to apply some of those tricks simply, very simple things, such as singing one of these icaros, one of these magical songs, or blowing tobacco smoke over the person, or otherwise do things to calm them down and kind of get them back on a stable setting. That's why it's very important to, have a structured context, some sort of ritual context. And, generally, it helps if there's a person, in this case, the shaman, that people have confidence in, that they sort of feel that this person is watching over them, or this group of persons. That's one of the dangers with with the drug tourism. Not all shaman are that experienced. Some you can't always trust. And so you sort of have to, it's better if you do this in a situation where you feel safe and you feel like the people that you're with, really are looking after you and not just there to take your money. And that's the thing. I think in the context of our society, if these psychedelics, which I really, you have to place them in a category apart from all of these other substances, which are more recreational, but the psychedelics are more of a spiritual or experiential thing. But I think if these things are ever going to be used, in our culture, we have to develop some kind of models, some kind of context. It may not be traditional shamanism. We can't really integrate that into our culture. No. But we can take some of the elements and combine it with elements of psychotherapy, for example.
Well, let's try this angle. Doctor, what would you say would be the psychological or metaphysical benefits or gains that a person might reasonably expect to take away from the experience?
Well, it's hard to say because the experience is as individual as the person, and a lot of it depends on what your expectations are. Again, getting back to this issue of intent. Mm-hmm. Some people may take it, and in the case of ayahuasca, it's generally emphasized that it's important to have an expectation, to express an intent. People may take it to have insights about their relationships, for example, mm-hmm. Or psychological problems, maybe depression or sleep difficulties, or even physical illnesses. People take ayahuasca, to have insights about their physical state of health. Other people may take it to solve problems, things that they're working on, intellectual things, or, it's taken for all these purposes. So then it allows intense physical self-examination or intellectual self-examination? It allows for both, yes, physical and intellectual self-examination. I think that ayahuasca is unique. It really, while the hallucinogens themselves stand apart from all of these other substances as unique, I think that ayahuasca is, again, unique among that group because I think that there is much more to its activity than just the psychological experience. It's not that you take it, you have the experience, and that then it's over. It continues to work afterwards, more than other hallucinogens. There's a lot of processing, both mental and physical, that goes on subsequent to the experience. Maybe you could comment on this for me. There are many scientists investigating near-death experiences. Mm-hmm. Very, very interesting things produced by near-death experiences, mm-hmm. Associations with white light, right. Relatives that have passed away,
examination of one's own life, flashing by you, that sort of thing. Is there a relationship of the pharmacology that occurs in the brain between any of these drugs and what might occur during a near-death experience, do you suppose?
Yes, I think there probably is. I think that these two territories interface with each other or share a common border. I mean, it is known, for example, that DMT and its close relative, 5-methoxy-DMT, are both neurochemicals. They both occur in the normal human brain. We're not sure what their functions are. People have suggested, my colleague Jace Calloway, a scientist in Finland, who has worked on these issues, suggests that maybe endogenous, that is internally occurring DMT, has to do with the modulation of dream states. And he's come up with a very plausible and testable theory that could show that maybe this is the physiological function of DMT. Other experiments have shown that in stress situations, in states of extreme stress, and I think we can put death in that category.
Absolutely.
The levels of DMT in your circulation, in your spinal fluid, for example, and presumably in your brain, are elevated markedly. So it's possible that in the dying state, the brain is actually programmed to turn these things out and modulate the experience, which is not to say that, it doesn't reduce it to a DMT experience. I think a DMT, is probably an element of the process of dying and probably of the process of being born as well.
Wow. It was a better question than I thought it was. That's really interesting. So then one might...
Well, I believe one of your guests was Dr. Rick Strassman on your program recently, or was that another?
It may have been another host.
Oh, he is a researcher, a colleague of mine and others in this field, and he was one of the first researchers to do some FDA-approved research on DMT at the University of New Mexico a few years ago. He was using synthetic DMT, administering it by injection. But he has recently written a book on his research called DMT, the Spirit Molecule, and it's very interesting. He has some very interesting and provocative things to say in that book about the possible functions of DMT. For example, he suggests that at the 49th day of conception, which is in many traditions thought to be the moment that the soul enters the body,
right,
that the pineal gland, which is the primary source of these endogenous tryptamines, there is a spike in its synthesis of DMT.
Wow.
I'm not sure what the basis of his statement is, but I think people with an interest in DMT should pick this book up. It's quite interesting. I'm just in the middle of it.
Well, that's fascinating. On the 49th day, when some say the soul is inculcated, there is a definite spike in the DMT or the presence of DMT in the brain. Wow,
that's right.
Wow.
This is what he says. I haven't seen the paper for it, but this is what he says.
Oh, my. That really is very provocative.
So it's not unreasonable to expect that at death something similar may go on. Generally, in states of extreme stress or psychological stress, it's not unreasonable to think that may trigger the release of DMT, which is actually released into the circulation as much as in the brain. Besides the brain, the other organ in the body that synthesizes DMT is the adrenal glands, which are very much involved with the stress response.
All right. Again, a question that you are fully... you're just welcome to not answer it, but while you've certainly concentrated on the science side of all this, it's hard to believe that back through the 60s and through the trips to the Amazon and all the time you spent with Terence, that you would not have, that you stayed a pure academic, that you would not have experienced all of this. So can we get that out of the way?
Well, yes, I have, and I think that's clear to everybody that knows our work. Yes, I mean, I have approached it from a scientific standpoint, but, you can't become a lens grinder or a telescope maker without occasionally looking through the telescope. I mean,
right.
This is the analogy.
So, was the experience for you? Would you describe it in as profound a manner as Terence did, or was it for you a different experience?
Which experience?
Well, DMT. We'll stick to DMT. Yeah, sure.
Well, yeah, it was pretty profound. I mean, it is one of the most reliably profound experiences in the smoked form because it is so overwhelming. In the orally active forms, it's sometimes extremely profound and sometimes not so profound. And again, this, it sort of depends on the circumstances. And sometimes you get a leg up, and sometimes you don't. In these orally active forms. But generally, I think that the orally active forms are probably the way, if nature meant for man to take DMT, it probably should have been in an orally active form potentiated by one of these MAO inhibitors.
Well, you know what? That's a really good question all by itself.
Compatible with physiology.
Doctor, that's a good question all by itself. Do you think that God or nature, however you want to phrase it, intended for man to make use of these plants and substances as has been done? Do you think it was intended that way? After all, they are here.
Well, exactly. They are here. I'm a little uncomfortable with the idea that nature intended it. I think that, we are part of nature, and we have always had a relationship with plants. I mean, I think that is the context in which you have to understand, the use of all of these psychoactive plants. It's part of a much vaster web of interaction that we have with the plant kingdom. All of these herbal medicines that people are interested in, the whole interest in natural healing and medicinal plants and so on is really an attempt, I think, on the part of an alienated, urbanized culture to get back to nature, to literally rediscover their roots. And the psychoactive plants, are within this context. But I don't think there's somebody. I don't think that there is somebody out there directing things. I mean, it's not like nature is conscious or God is telling us to take these plants. It's that in the process of evolving on this planet as part of the biosphere, we have co-evolved with these plants and with these substances.
On the other hand, there were the 10 Commandments, and he didn't tell us not to take them.
He didn't tell us.
No. Doctor, hold on. We're at the bottom of the hour. We'll be right back from the high desert. I'm Art Bell. My guest is Dr. Dennis McKenna. Now to Dr. Dennis McKenna, and we were talking about plants and the fact that they were here, and I said, well, no commandments against interacting with the plants, or as you pointed out earlier, having a relationship with them. It's been a coevolution. The plants have been here probably before the walking things, but we're both here, and they're here to be used or looked at or admired or perhaps chewed on, or I don't know. What do you think is intended for human beings and plants?
Well, again, you keep using this word intention. I don't think anybody is running the show. I think that this is sort of an organic process that's going forward, evolutionarily. The thing you have to understand about plants is that they're very different than animals. That seems like an obvious statement, but one of the ways, and the way that they interact with the world and experience the world is very different than we do. One famous botanist made the statements that plants have substituted biosynthesis for behavior. Mm-hmm. Now, what he meant by that is that plants, because they can photosynthesize, they make their own food, and as a result, they don't have to go foraging for food because they can make it from sunlight and carbon dioxide and water. One of the consequences of that is that they make a vast variety of chemical compounds. They are virtuoso chemists. And in the same way that animals interact with their environment through behavior, through the famous flee or fight reaction, sure, these sorts of things, plants interact with their environment through chemistry, and they communicate with other organisms in their environment, bacteria in the soil, fungi in the soil, other plants, insects, birds, other animals that may feed on them, and human beings through these chemical messengers, through these molecular messengers. And the molecular messengers, speak in a figurative sense. They speak to organisms on many levels. They happen to also make chemical messengers that resemble our own neurotransmitters. And, that's where it gets interesting for us, yes, for this particular topic, because then you're talking about plants that literally talk to you. And, they don't say anything, but they, when you ingest them, their neurotransmitter-like chemicals interact with your neurotransmitter systems, and you get some very interesting, results. And I think in some sense, you're seeing the world kind of the way they see it. I don't say that they use these neurotransmitters for perception, but this process of chemically mediated coevolution between plants and humans and all organisms, is a concept that I think needs to be explored. There is a field of science called chemical ecology, which is basically, this is the territory we're in here, the way that chemical systems are used to mediate relationships between organisms. And, it's a two-way street. The plants, we largely value plants, if you think about it, for the chemical compounds they contain, whether they be nutrients or cellulose, which are fibers that go into textiles, yes, or medicinal compounds that we may use, or yes, these more neuroactive type compounds.
Or, as you said in the beginning, nutrition. And again, then, I proffer the word intended, because whether it's a plant or an animal, these are all things that co-evolved with us, and, right, and even the biblical scholars will say that the plants and the animals were put here for our use. Now, you can take that or not, but intended does seem like a reasonable word to me.
Well, if it's intended, I guess the question is, by whom was it intended?
Oh, we could have a conversation about that if you want.
Right. Is it God that's running the show, or is it dome-headed beings in geosynchronous orbit, or is it Gaia? I'm more comfortable with the Gaia notion that the whole biosphere is in some sense an organism. You can think of the entire biosphere. It's really a mega organism or a superorganism. And just as in a cell in the body, all of the processes of the cell between, say, what's going on in the nucleus and what's going on in the cytoplasm and on the membrane that's all controlled and coordinated through chemical messengers that are shuttling back and forth from the membrane to the cytoplasm to the nucleus and so on. The same thing is going on in the biosphere. The biosphere is permeated with chemical messengers.
Absolutely.
And many of them are made by plants. And plants are very good at it. I mean, they use these molecular messengers to establish relationships with all sorts of organisms in the environment.
Well, that makes a war.
Insects, for example. Insects are probably the primary example.
Okay.
Plants depend on insects for their pollination in many cases. And the insects, of course, get benefits from the plant in the form of nectar and pollen, which they collect as food sources. So it's a symbiosis, this notion of a symbiotic relationship, which has been very extensively studied between plants and insects, not so extensively studied between plants and humans. But that's the key term, I think, that you have to come at it from that angle. What we're looking at here is a plant-human symbiosis that has impacts on the plants and impacts on us.
So then a war on plants is really screwing with Mother Nature.
Well, it's a really misguided idea. I mean, what gives us, we're only one species in the biosphere, what gives us the right to, decree that some other species, because it happens to be a plant that produces a chemical that, our society has not been able to come to terms with, do we then have the right to decree that, this particular plant should be exterminated from the face of the earth? I don't think so. I mean, if we were talking about an ethnic group of humans, this wouldn't be tolerated.
Okay, then instead of, bearing in mind the fact that we cannot come to terms with it, instead of going to war against it, how do we come to terms with it?
How do we come to terms with it? Well, for one thing, again, going back to making a distinction between plants and chemicals, I think that's part of the thing. And you say, okay, if you want to grow marijuana in your backyard, if you want to grow mushrooms, if you want to grow opium even, we don't care. Whatever you do as a gardener is not of concern to us. We're going to focus on the harder drugs, the drugs where there have to be infrastructures of creation and distribution, and you have to have, that's one aspect of it. And then the other aspect of it is simply education. I think you have to give people the tools to make informed choices about, number one, whether to use drugs. Number two, if the answer to number one is yes, I want to use drugs, the second question is, which drugs are you going to use? Mm-hmm. And the third question is, how are you going to use them? Mm-hmm. And this is the problem with the war on drugs and the whole dialogue is there's this big, scary category called drugs, that all things are put into. Well, there are drugs and there are drugs. There are many different types of drugs. And it seems that the drugs of the drug warriors have set up this big, scary bugaboo called drugs, but of course they don't include in that, the drugs that they happen to favor, which are, tobacco, alcohol. These things are also drugs.
Sure they are.
So I think we have to have a more rational dialogue about the subject, and we have to stop scaring people and try to give them, the tools to make informed decisions. It all comes down to education. And it's like saying, well, you don't have to use drugs to have a full life and to have a completely fulfilled life. If you make that choice, fine. If you do choose to use substances, be careful about which relationships you form with these substances and the circumstances under which you use them. It's no different than forming relationships with people, And Andrew Weil said all this years ago in his book, The Natural Mind. I mean, nobody listened then. Nobody's listening now. But that is the solution. Nobody wants their kids to go out and get messed up with drugs, and the key thing is, if you promulgate what is essentially misinformation, I mean, let's not put too fine a point on it. Let's call it lies. Kids are not stupid. They're going to find out, and then, they will disregard what you say. So they say, well, you lied about marijuana, so you must be lying about heroin.
Been saying that for years.
And they've been saying that for years.
Yeah, nothing
Why
makes
not
me
have
angrier.
a reasonable debate?
I know. Nothing through the years has made me angrier than the lies that are told about marijuana, because, of course, they then cause the young people to just go right on up the chain, and before you know it, the cops put them in the back of a car with crack cocaine, and then off they go, part of the system, in jail.
Yes, that's right. I mean, the laws that are designed to control the drug problem are having a worse impact than the problem itself.
Mm-hmm.
I think Jimmy Carter said this. If that's the case, then we need to rethink this whole dialogue. And in terms of the psychedelics, I think that they do need to be used in a ritual context or in a fairly structured context, and the use of guides or more experienced people who, can kind of structure the experience, much as it goes on in shamanism, and shamanism is really the model. I don't think we can reproduce it, but I think we can take a few pages from that book and try and implement it, and I can envision in a more rational society, a situation where there would be a place or there would be a center where one could go and have these experiences, and it would be legal, and it would be, it would be beneficial to people.
We are not now that rational, nor are we even close.
No.
How far in the future, if you can just sort of stand back and observe our progression socially, how far in the future do you envision something like this might be a reality?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, it's really very hard to say, because I don't see. I mean, I think that the people, as almost always, the people are way out in front of their government on this issue. Most people feel that medical marijuana, for example, should be available to people that need it, to people that have diseases or chronic problems that this could help. I think most people feel that rather than being put in jail, people should be given access to treatments, as their first option. There have been propositions passed in California to this effect and a couple of other states. So the people have a much more reasonable approach to the problem than the government does. The problem is the government tends to be slow to change, and there's also a vested interest in keeping things the way they are.
Well, for example, you mentioned Jimmy Carter.
Yeah.
A lot of people thought that when Jimmy Carter became president, there'd probably be a move to legalize marijuana. Well, lo and behold, didn't happen.
It didn't happen.
Then people thought, well, next time we get a Democrat in office, it'll happen then. Lo and behold, didn't happen.
Right. Because, again, I think this is a function of the fact that it's very hard for politicians to come out on this issue. Even if they do feel that it's misguided, anytime you make a statement that is, in the least perceived as being pro-drug, you're vilified.
I know.
This is the problem, and politicians as a group are not a particularly brave
That's right.
bunch of people. I mean, their decisions are based on, what they think is going to get them reelected, and there is such a vocal anti-drug majority, or minority, actually. I think it is a minority, but they're very vocal. And so, if you say, well, maybe we should take a different approach, then immediately they're pounced upon.
Well,
and
Doctor,
no rational conversation is possible.
Doctor, I lived in a state where there was a rational moment. I lived in Alaska when the Alaskan Supreme Court struck down the laws against marijuana, and it became legal to have to grow your own plants and to have, I can't remember, an ounce or two for your own personal use.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a great success for a while in Alaska. But then all of a sudden from Washington, D.C., they came rushing in and all conversation stopped. The drug war was in full force, and Alaska reversed it all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
well, again, this is sort of the irony. The current administration and the position of the conservatives traditionally is get government off people's back. And what I actually think they mean is get the government off corporations' backs. When it comes to what we do in our bedrooms or what we put in our bodies or how we handle our reproductive choices, these regimes are very much totalitarian. They want to control that kind of behavior. They think it's very much their business. And, this is where the conflict is.
I take it you would consider yourself politically a libertarian?
I'm not a libertarian. I mean, about the only thing I agree with the libertarian agenda is the notion that these substances should be regulated in a sane way. No, I think government has a place in people's lives. I'm basically a liberal, yes. I guess. I think government should be concentrating on helping people and, making people's lives better. If you pay taxes, why not get some benefit from it? What bothers me is that my taxes go for, the war in Colombia, which is not being talked about in the media and is a war, or the missile defense system, this completely absurd technological boondoggle that most of the experts say will never work. I mean, these are the things that I would rather not have my taxes spent on.
Well, I agree with you completely, although certainly your view with regard to these substances is very libertarian. And
yes.
And you say otherwise you're a liberal, which mean that it would generally mean to a lot of people that you want government involved in your life in a lot of areas.
But not in my personal life. I don't want them telling me, I want them to be concerned with the public health aspects of drug use and all of these other things, but I don't really want them to say, if you smoke this herb or if you drink this plant, you're going to jail. And I think, it's just absurd. I'd rather have them giving, a more intelligent level of support to that sort of thing.
All right. I would very much like to allow some of the audience after the break to ask you questions if you're up for that.
Sure.
Are you? Okay, good. Stay right there then. My guest is Dr. Dennis McKenna, the brother of the late Terrence McKenna, who appeared on the show many, many times. And they're both obviously brilliant minds. I'm Art Bell, and this is Coast to Coast AM, screaming through the night like a freight train. Glad to have you along as a passenger. Sit down, stick around.
Sweet dreams are made of these. Who am I to disagree? I travel the world and the 7 seas. Everybody's looking for something. Some of them want to use you. Some of them want to get used by you. Some of them want to abuse you. Some of them want to be abused.
Dennis McKenna, that's got to bring back some memories for you, I suppose, huh?
Absolutely.
You were there and just about at that time. Socially, do you think, Doctor, that it was the right direction at the wrong time?
How do you mean?
Well, I mean the whole 60s thing, the whole San Francisco scene, the whole the whole national scene, frankly. It was moving toward a gentler, more aware social time for the young people, but then sort of the war got in the way, and then we started the war on drugs and war. But
right.
For a while there, we were headed in a bit of a different direction, weren't we?
Well, we were headed in a bit of a different direction, and yes, I think that the war in Vietnam had a lot to do with derailing it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that also just sort of the disillusion that happened in the American dream that probably started with the assassination of Kennedy, if not before. I mean, I think that really impacted a lot of people in my generation. I can remember when that happened, and both Terrence and myself, we were just in a state of shock for days after that happened. There was little you could do except just stare at the television.
That's right.
A lot of people of our generation thought that Kennedy was the sign of some needed change, and when he was struck down, I think it was kind of a message that no, nothing is really going to change. However flawed he may have been as a man, I think he symbolized a change for a lot of people. And I think when that went away, I think it began the process of deepening cynicism that has continued. And
then we sort of moved toward, as the decades went by, it seems like we moved from where we were in the 60s and where we were headed to a more materialistic society. Mm-hmm. And we kind of replaced what went on with the 60s with materialism. Anyway, listen, I want to ask you a question that's a sensitive question and about Terrence, and it was actually a question that I asked Terrence, and I guess I would like to ask you. Many people said brain tumor.
Right.
Why should we not believe that it's possible that some of the substances and chemicals and things that Terrence did contributed to that, may have been a main contributor to that brain tumor?
Right.
I'm sure you've thought about it.
Well, I have thought about it, and the answer is that there's simply no evidence for it. If psychedelics or cannabis caused brain tumors, there would be a lot more
brain tumors,
that kind of thing, than there are. Brain tumors, particularly the kind that he had, is actually an extremely rare form of cancer. Only 20,000 cases a year supposedly are reported in this country, although I personally think it must be more than that. But as cancers go, this one is rare, and there's simply no evidence. There's no correlation between your intake of marijuana, say, and brain tumors. In fact, there is research that has been done that shows that cannabis, tetrahydrocannabinol, may inhibit brain tumors. Obviously, for my brother, this didn't work, but you can say that, but it's not really a fair criticism. Another person who maybe never touches any of these things may get a brain tumor, and you may say, well, it's because they led a bad life or something.
Sure.
I just don't. It just doesn't hold up.
All right. Before going to the phone lines here, Scott in Sonora, California, asks a question that may not even be relevant, or you may know what he's talking about, but he says, please ask Dr. McKenna if he remembers what he was experiencing when he said that, quote, he didn't want to be a giant insect, end quote, at the experiment at La Carrera.
La Churrera.
La Churrera, okay.
Right, right.
So it rings a bell, huh?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you didn't want to be a giant insect. What was that all about?
Well, it's hard to explain that without sort of going into the whole narrative of what got us to go to La Churrera at the first place, which we started talking about at the top of the program, but then we sort of got derailed into other subjects. But I guess to put it in a nutshell, a lot of the ideas and concerns that we were sort of processing at La Churrera in these hyper psychedelic states had to do with the notion of insect metamorphosis, and insects undergo several stages of metamorphosis, like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly is the classic example. Mm-hmm. And we had some notions, whether correct or not, at least we thought at the time they seemed correct, that the tryptamines and the beta-carbolines in this plant environment had to do with a kind of an actual metamorphosis in humans.
I see.
And that, and that was what the basis of that was about. I wasn't so sure I wanted to undergo this metamorphosis.
I see.
And I was convinced that I was about to.
I bet you saw The Fly, didn't you?
Actually, I've never seen it.
Oh, you haven't seen The Fly?
I haven't seen it.
It's just as well,
I should put it on my list.
Uh-huh. Obviously, you're not exactly an anti-drug poster child, and nor was your brother. Your brother was a brilliant, brilliant man. You're a brilliant, brilliant man. And a lot of people who are fighting this drug war, I don't think like hearing you speak, because you're obviously brilliant, and somehow the brain cells have stayed in place throughout whatever it is you have done, as was the case with Terrence.
So far.
All right. First-time caller line. You're on the air with Dr. Dennis McKenna. Hi.
Hi, Art. I'm Laura, and I'm a PhD candidate in a Washington, D.C. area university, and I'm doing the first ethnographic life history narrative-based research study with near-death experiencers.
Oh?
So I'm getting some very interesting findings, which I'd like to talk to you about more at some other time. Now, you guys kept talking while I was after I made the notes I wanted to make, because I had a chance to spend some time with Terrence in Palenque, and I had a couple comments that I wanted from Dennis. But a question you just raised about the brain tumor and the drug use.
Yes.
Raised the issue for me of, remember the Miami guy who had the strange heart attack and the bizarre little sort of twist in his vein or artery.
Oh, yes.
And the Native Americans who pointed out that, from where their point of view, that's called an energy attack. I'm not sound too paranoid. I just wanted to throw that in as another question that might be asked. And I have a wonderful quote from Terrence about an experience of Dennis's that your insect thing made me want to read, but let me hold off because maybe we don't have time. But I'm loving hearing from Dennis, and I love spending time with Terrence. Read all their work. I think the research that they have done and the personal accounts that they have shared are not simply valuable, but extremely brave to stand out on the edge they're standing out on, and there's tremendous resistance. As Terrence said, culture is not your friend in certain contexts.
I would agree with that.
And I wanted to raise this. The reason I was there is I got a scholarship that year. That fellow from Texas gave some scholarships, and I got to go to Palenque and spend this 10 days having this wonderful ethnobotanical field seminar with an incredible group of people, including the Shulgins and Terrence, and because I realized that there were analogs between near-death experience narratives, and I'm a near-death experiencer, as was my mother, which, fueled my interest.
Well, you obviously heard the comments earlier with respect to DMT.
Well, no.
Oh, you didn't?
Both the light-related experiences related to ayahuasca, now a lot is in the research, near-death studies research about ketamine, which I know the least about. But I went there because that woman who was involved in Iboga research, Ibogaine,
Deborah Nash, Dr. Deborah Nash.
Dr. Deborah Nash was going to be there. And there is this analog between NDEs and that experience in the life review that's very, very obvious. Mm-hmm. I also wanted to say you hadn't mentioned Scopastora, nor I think ketamine, and I'd like to hear what you have to say about them. The other thing I found that was bizarre, that didn't come up in clinical NDE model-shaped research. This is work I'm continuing now that I did 2 years' work of field research on for my MA. Now it's continuing as my just-approved dissertation work, is that there was this major, inexplicably high incidence of narratives where it was clear there was sort of overlap between that you could take a batch of these, change a few characteristics, hand them to alien encounter researchers like John Mack, mm-hmm. or near-death experience researchers. And each of those groups would go near-death experience or alien encounter. Mm-hmm. And because it came up with so many of my informants, And the only other research that's come up in that high incidence is PMH Atwater, who, like me, her methodology involves more person-centered, informant-generated narrative. So you get data you wouldn't get. I would never have thought to mention a strange experience that I had, one connected maybe with the one that Dennis and Terrence had in True Hallucinations, which I'd love to hear him talk about.
All right, listen, we're way short on time.
Yeah, so I'd like to know what does he make of this overlap and the fact that we're trying to model experiences we may not know as much about as we think
we know. Okay.
Well, a lot of things have been touched on. I think that this notion, this business of the aliens and encounters with the aliens in abduction experiences, the near-death experiences, and also in psychedelics. What do I make of it? I'm not sure what to make of it. On one hand, the rational reductionist part of me says, it's got to be part of the self. Certainly with psychedelics, you would think, no matter how other it seems to be, ultimately these things are coming from some part of the self. It may not be a part that you know very much. That's the reductionist model. The other, it's possible to look at it another way. Maybe there are other dimensions, and what we mean by other dimensions, I'm not sure. Maybe some other level of etheric vibration. Mm-hmm. Who knows? More familiar, more, other people on your program know more about this than I do. I just feel like all bets are off, in a sense, that particularly when we're trying to understand the mind and what the capabilities of the mind are and how it interfaces with reality, we can't really make any assumptions.
Well, our nation's best physicists are talking about multiple dimensions.
Well, exactly.
And who is to say that
parallel worlds?
That there is not a path and a door opened. Comment briefly, if you would, on ketamine. Ketamine is being called the NDE drug.
Well, my own experience with ketamine is extremely limited. I've only taken it one time in my life, and I didn't find it that it wasn't pleasant for me. It was interesting. It was sort of it was sort of like an anti-psychedelic to me, in the sense that it seemed to be a state of sensory deprivation and complete isolation from the body. And
wow.
Sort of like, how in states of sensory deprivation you start to confabulate, you start to fill that empty space
yes.
with thoughts.
Yes, of course.
And ketamine was like that for me. Beyond that, I don't know. It may be the NDE drug. I'm not sure. My own candidate for that would be something like 5-methoxy-DMT, which is actually an order of magnitude more potent than DMT in terms of what the dose is. But its effects are somewhat similar, although it doesn't have a marked visual effect. You don't see, colored hallucinations as so much on 5-methoxy-DMT, but yet it's just as profound, and it seems to be, at least, again, my experience is somewhat limited with this, but the few times I have encountered it, you do seem to go to a place which seems close to what they describe as this near-death experience.
That's amazing. All right. Wildcard line, you're on the air with Dr. Dennis McKenna. Good morning.
Good morning, Art. Good morning, Dennis.
Good morning.
God, I'm having a flashback.
Yeah, I bet.
I was a runaway flower child in 1964, became an electric acid test flower child, Ken Kesey style. Wound up in 1967 living on a hippie houseboat in the 3 boats down from Alan Watts, and everybody I knew who used psychedelic drugs were very brilliant, very intelligent, very creative people, okay? I have, over the years, in those days, I was a teenager in my early 20s, I use lots and lots of psychedelics of all kinds, oxyacid, psilocybin mushrooms, mescaline, peyote buttons, DMT, and DET, which I'm sure, Dennis, you know what DET is.
Mm-hmm. Diethyltryptamine.
Yeah. Well, the point I'm trying to make is I've gone to college, I have built a business. I'm a very successful person. I don't have brain tumors, and I'm sorry about your brother.
Thank you.
The reality of the situation is most other people that I know who also during those days had been similarly involved in those sorts of things went on to be very successful in their careers. Mm-hmm. The percentage of casualties, I think, is very, very small. I think there's greater casualties from the later drug. See, there's an early drug wave, and then the next one was the cocaine, heroin, speed, methamphetamine wave.
Which came with the materialism wave, by the way.
Well, exactly, Art. That's right. That's precisely it. The first wave was the consciousness wave. Most people were discussing, when they were tripping or smoking pot, were talking about things like, books by Velikovsky, Worlds in Collision, Earth in Upheaval, things like that. The Urantia book, Metaphysics, the early days of health food, health consciousness, Earth consciousness. It's got a bad rap. And I think that the war on drugs has turned into a very politicized power trip that the establishment uses to control people. It's convenient for them. It gives excuses to have larger police forces and larger military and bigger prisons and to spend the public money in ways that none of us really want to see happen.
Well, have either one of you considered the fact that what do we care about? What reports do we get? We get reports on new housing starts, on national productivity, on all of these things that relate to how productive people are in turning out material things. And I think some of these drugs are considered to be anti-productivity. And I bet that's at the core of a lot of this war. That's just me.
Well, I think you're right, because they saw that too many of the hippie types were going to the nature, wanting to become Native Americans, and were renouncing the civilization, living in teepees. I did that for a while when I was young. Went off into Big Sur, lived in a tree house, and
exactly. Exactly, when you could have been in a factory doing something or another. Doctor?
Turning out useful widgets, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Well, your caller makes a couple of interesting points that I'd like to comment on. One is this notion that, the wider cultural perception is that if you use psychedelics, you have to be somehow drooling in the corner or somehow dysfunctional.
Yes.
And most people, in fact, who have, in which these things have played a role are anything but dysfunctional. They are generally high-functioning, creative people, often on the cutting edge of whatever their field is. I mean, the whole computer and net revolution, the Silicon Valley revolution was largely spearheaded by people who were involved with psychedelics. So there is that element. It doesn't, again, in a very, very small number of cases, some people do run into
something
problems.
Went wrong, sure. No, he was right. In the great majority of cases, these people are now productive citizens. All right, we've got a break here. We'll be right back. Dr. Dennis McKenna is my guest. I'm Art Bell, and this is Coast to Coast AM. Again, Dr. Dennis McKenna, and welcome back, Doctor.
Thank you.
All right. Gee, so many people want to talk to you, so let us continue, I guess. East of the Rockies, you're on the air with Dr. McKenna. Good morning.
Good morning, Art. How are you and the doctor today?
Just fine. Where are you?
I am in Indiana, PA.
Okay.
I actually have two quick questions, if you don't mind.
Not at all.
My first is, you spoke of legalization of marijuana and the war on drugs. I wonder if the doctor, in your mind, do you differentiate between those natural drugs such as marijuana and peyote and those which would be considered synthesized like LSD in terms of legalization, or just simply level of deviance?
Level of deviance.
I don't. There's no nice way to put that, I guess.
Well, no. I mean, if you've been listening to the previous conversation, we were making a distinction between plants and drugs. I'm not a doctrinaire saying that LSD, for example, should be banned and persecuted, and peyote shouldn't be. I mean, I think, we have to find a context in which, particularly with the psychedelics, in which these things, can be used in a way that is safer for people, but people shouldn't be denied access to these experiences if they feel that that they should have them. I'm not sure what you do about the war on drugs. That's just one example that, it has to do with the fact that you form relationships with drugs or plants. And it's much easier in a way if you have a relationship with a plant that happens to also be a drug. I think it's, I think you have a much better chance to, have a good relationship with that particular entity if you grow it, if you nurture it, and in return it provides you with a visionary experience. I mean, that is a true symbiosis, and that's what we're talking about. It's harder to have that kind of relationship with something that may come in a gelatin capsule, or in the case of LSD on a window pane, square of gelatin. Not that it's not possible. I mean, I know that people do use LSD in a creative way, but it's this whole issue about how do we, if people are going to have relationships with drugs, how do we foster good relationships, mutually beneficial relationships, rather than destructive relationships. And with some drugs, because of the way they work, because of their neurochemistry, it's more difficult to foster good relationships. In the sense, I mean, good, bad, these are charged words, but you know what I mean. Right. Relationships that are not self-destructive. With the psychedelics, I think it's much, they lend themselves to a more positive type of relationship because they do open the way into experiences that many people would consider spiritual experiences.
All right. And my second question, pardon me if either of these were mentioned before. I didn't catch the whole program. But not too long ago, I was watching TV and I saw something on the CIA admittance of using psychedelics and things like LSD in the 50s for, I guess you'd call it quasi-mind control, more just...
All right. Caller, hold it right there. Hey, that's great, because that's exactly where I was going, Doctor. The government had a relationship with LSD for a while.
Right.
And I guess not such a good one in view of what they did.
Right. Well, these drugs don't particularly have moral qualities in the sense that, if you're a bad person, just taking a psychedelic is not going to make you a good person. I mean, it's a two-sided, it's a two-way street, as in any relationship. It depends on what you bring to it. Just because the CIA used LSD in their experiments it didn't turn them into saints, obviously.
No, it didn't.
So these things are morally ambiguous in a certain sense. They can, and you see this again in the traditional context where ayahuasca is used, for example, in mestizo society in South America. An ayahuasquero, just because he knows how to use ayahuasca, is not necessarily somebody you can trust or somebody you want to trust. There is a whole other subtext going on of what's called brujeria, or what we would call black magic, where they use the powers to put hexes on people. Mm-hmm. And in fact, in Peru, in mestizo ayahuasquero society, illness, disease, misfortune, all of these things are almost always seen as the effects of some brujo, some evil practitioner having put the whammy on you.
Speaking of evil practitioners, was Terrence or yourself ever approached by anybody in government?
You mean because of our involvement in these things?
Yes.
Well, not for a long time. Not since 1969, actually.
69, huh?
Right.
But, I mean, were you approached not so much because of your use or as a result of your use, but perhaps to help the government in some way with their proposed use?
No, not really. Not really. I mean, I did a postdoc in a laboratory at National Institutes of Mental Health. I was there for 2 years, and I was working on a synthetic at the time, but I was basically working on using radioactively labeled analogs of STP to map serotonin receptors, to try to map the serotonin receptors in the mouse brain or in the rat's brain. But I think it's interesting that, I was able to get that fellowship. I went there, I worked there. There were never any problems. And this speaks to, one of the issues. People who are interested in psychedelics, in doing research on psychedelics, often say, we can't do it. The government will not allow us to do this work. Mm-hmm. That really isn't true anymore. That is changing. Rick Strassman, the fellow I mentioned who just wrote the book called DMT, The Spirit Molecule, he was really the pioneer. And for a lot of this work, he got tired of people. He was a qualified psychiatrist, an investigator at the University of New Mexico. He got tired of people saying, you can't do this work. So he decided, well, I'll do it. And he applied. He went through all the channels. He got approval, and he was able to give DMT to people in a clinical setting and do this work. That sort of opened, I wouldn't say the floodgates, but it opened the door a crack. And now there are other researchers are, beginning to look into this again. One of the websites I gave you, the Hefter Research Institute, which I'm a board member of, and it's on the web at hefter.org. We're basically a bunch of scientists, neuroscientists, psychiatrists, ethnopharmacologists, people like that, who want to do legitimate research with psychedelics to try to find out, well, basically not only how they work, but how they might be used to help people.
Well, what about applications in mental illness?
Well, exactly. These sorts of things. I mean, in one sense, you almost have to go the medical model. I don't say that they should always be used, to treat people who are sick. They can also benefit people who are not, who don't really have illnesses, but who might just want to learn from the experience. But if you're trying to work through these academic, government, and research channels, you sort of have to come up with a rationale. Where, is there an illness? Is there something that these things can treat? And in fact, there are. The focus right now is on things like obsessive-compulsive disorder, for example, post-traumatic stress syndrome. These sorts of addiction is another big one. Alcoholism. Potentially, psychedelics could be used in therapies for these sorts of things. But and who knows where it ends? I don't know how many of you saw Andy Weil on 60 Minutes the other night. I didn't see the show, but he actually came out and admitted what he said many years ago, that LSD cured his allergies. So who knows?
Who knows, indeed.
Yeah, he had an experience where he had been very allergic to cats all of his life, couldn't get near them. One day he was on LSD, and a cat crawled into his lap, and he didn't have any allergic reaction and claimed that he never had one since.
Isn't Not interesting.
So that's rather remarkable, I think.
Very remarkable. West of the Rockies, you're on the air with Dr. McKenna. Hello.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning. Where are you?
This is Gary from Earthquake, Seattle.
Okay.
Everything's going smoother up here, fortunately.
Good. Glad to hear it.
Yes. Dennis, I was one of those people who had very many good thoughts about your brother. I think he was a tremendously courageous and brilliant person, and I wished he was still with us.
Well, we all do. We all do. Thank you.
Yes, we do. We need more like him. Ari, you said a couple profound things I just heard recently. One of the things you said was that, I'm one of the people that feel that our society was on the right track during the 60s, and I think we've taken huge psychic damage since then.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
It might have been a bit premature. It could be some of us were not able to put it in context at that time yet, but certainly I think we've gone in the wrong direction since then. One thing, the caller before this, or two before this, he had some great things to say, and I came along at an age group right behind him in the mid-'70s, and I was fortunate to go to college and find a group of friends, and after some research, we decided that these substances had been around for thousands of years, even long before Christianity and its teachings, and that's why we embarked upon taking many of these psychoactive drugs, and, we had nothing but positive experiences. I would say to your audience, for instance, they have nothing to fear from these substances. They take you inward and they take you upward, and they lead you to nothing but more profound thinking.
Well, I don't think fear is really the model, but I do think they should be respected. That's the thing. An earlier caller said, for example, that, they're just fun. You should remember, something that's not being said is they're just a lot of fun. Well, they can be a lot of fun.
That's something Terrence might have said.
They're not always fun.
I completely agree with that. The two experiences, I think, if we had it in our power to give people in the thirst to help us make a psychic breakthrough, I think the two would be to help people take psychoactive substances and maybe to put them in Earth orbit for 24 hours and just let them float there and look down.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I think that would help our society progress more than anything at this point that I can think of for us to do.
Well, in the right context, I think it could. I think it could. Going back to this, what an earlier caller said about how, the perception is that if you take psychedelics, you have to be dysfunctional, or the larger society thinks it drives you crazy, or it makes you feeble-minded or something. In the course of working, I worked with my colleagues on what we call the Huasca Project. We did a biomedical study of Huasca, which is the Portuguese transliteration of ayahuasca, and Huasca is used in Brazil by several syncretic churches, one of which is called the UDV, the União de Vegetal, and it's a syncretic church. And ayahuasca is their sacrament. What was most amazing to me in the process of doing this study, we had to hang around with these people a lot. Subjects were, being tested, and we were drawing blood samples, and we spent about 5 weeks in very close contact with this group in the summer of 1993 when we were doing this study. But what was remarkable was just experiencing this society. They're a very close-knit community. In lectures, I referred to them as psychedelic Mormons, with the meaning that is meant to be complementary to Mormons and the UDV, in the sense that Mormons also place a great deal of emphasis on, being productive members of their community, having a close-knit community, being creative, being successful in business, not, in other words, being a drag on the society, but trying to help society. And these people were much that way. They had much less incidents of domestic violence, for example, than is common in Brazilian society. No alcoholism, no drug abuse. Most of the people were successful. They were doctors, lawyers, businessmen, even politicians. So I was just impressed in hanging out with this group how high-functioning most of them were. And, their kids were seemed healthy and intelligent. Their families seemed stable. And a lot of it, of course, had to do with the community that they were involved with. I mean, it was a very, very close-knit community. But I think a lot of it also had to do with the fact that they had this tea, as they call it, this waska, as their sacrament. And, every 2 weeks at a minimum, they would take it in large groups every 2 weeks. And I think they learned from that. And it helped them to keep their lives on track. There were aspects of the UDV that I would not, I personally, I don't really, I would not join a cult. But if I was going to join a cult,
that might be the one.
That might be the one.
Caller, anything else quickly?
I just believe our government, as you said earlier, I think our government fears these substances and does not want people to have access to them. Let's remember, most of them are not physically addictive as far as we know in any way, shape, or form, the psychoactives.
The psychedelics.
Psychedelics.
Right.
I believe they lead to far too much contemplation and deep thinking, and the government is afraid of that, just as I believe they're afraid to tell us the truth about what they know about possible extraterrestrials coming here.
Yeah, I think that the caller's got a point here. I think not so much with the so-called drugs of abuse, but with the psychedelics, the problem is that they make you have funny ideas, and funny ideas are always a threat to the established order.
Well, yeah, they're viewed as anti-productivity.
Well, anti-productivity, or they just don't want people thinking too much. I mean, that's a more sinister aspect of the drug war that does concern me a lot, in that, in some ways the drug war is not about protecting people from harmful substances. It's about controlling states of mind. It's about saying, certain states of mind, certain territories are just off limits, and people should not be allowed these types of experiences. Within the next few years, this is almost certain to happen, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But within the next few years, probably through biofeedback or similar types of technology, direct neural stimulation, it'll be possible to have these experiences without using drugs, by using some kind of electromagnetic mechanism. How is the government going to react?
I don't know. That's fascinating. Well, bypassing laws. Doctor...
Bypassing laws.
Yeah, that's right. I always ask, Doctor...
Which, of course, will stop the problem.
That's right. Can you stick around one more hour?
Can I stick around another hour?
That's it. I've got only one more hour of the show.
I'm getting I'm running a little bit out of steam, but let's go another half hour and see how it goes.
You've got it.
4 a.m. here.
Oh, that's right. I forgot.
Fading fast.
Back east. All right, Doctor, stay right there. We'll be right back. This is Coast to Coast AM from the high desert.
Never ends.
Get off of me! I want to see what's up! What the fuck is this shit? Who the fuck are you, lady? Why the fuck did you hug my hand?
Quite a little mouth on him, isn't there?
What the fuck is this, the piano? Why ain't this broad talking?
I believe the answers that you seek lie within my companion's eyes.
What the fuck does that mean? Has everyone gone fucking nuts? What the fuck happened to that guy's head? I want some